A common swift in its lifetime flies about 2 million kilometres, enough to fly to the moon and back twice over, and then once more to the moon. For at least 10 months of every year, it never ceases flying. Sky-washed, sleeping on the wing, it has no need to land. Hello, I'm Katherine Rundell, and I'm here to discuss my book, The Golden Mole, which is this month's pick for the Queen's Reading Room Book Club. The Golden Mole, Another Vanishing Treasure, is a collection of essays about the living world. Each one is a different animal, and each animal either is endangered or has a subspecies that is endangered, which, as you can imagine, narrows the field almost not at all. And I wanted it to be a book that would enchant people, that would make the familiar unfamiliar, and also introduce them to creatures about which they might know very little, things like the pangolin or the narwhal or the Greenland shark. I wanted it to be a book that would offer us a sense that our knowledge of the living world is vast and breathtakingly impressive. And even so, it barely skims the very edges of the beginning of the truth of the creatures with which we share this planet. I wanted to write The Golden Mole, in part because I wanted to introduce people to creatures that they might never have heard of, to creatures that are so extraordinary as to seem almost fictional, like the narwhal with its horn, like a unicorn of the ocean, and like the Greenland shark, which lives up to 500 years, and like the pangolin, which curls up into a perfect scaly ball. And also because I wanted to give people a sense of the creatures that we find very familiar, like crows and spiders and hedgehogs, are also extraordinary. They have an incredible history and a biological complexity and an intelligence that would astonish us if we really understood it. And I also wanted to give people a broader sense of the natural world as something so urgently in need of our protection. Right now, today, more than ever. I wanted to give people a sense that it is worth falling in love with it, this world of ours. It is worth fighting with perhaps more time and more fury than we have hitherto given. And I wanted to give people a sense that it is not too late, that while we are one of the most nature-depleted nations on earth in the UK, we can still turn a living thing around. I wanted to say to people, there is still so much to be saved, and the time to give up is never. Some of the creatures I've met myself. Some of them we've all met. Everyone has seen a crow and a spider. I would often begin, I'm very lucky in that I have a fellowship at an Oxford college, and so I have access to astonishing archives. I would often go back to the history of the ways that we have thought about these creatures. For instance, the idea that Pliny the Elder thought that the way hedgehogs feed their young is by rolling in apples and then running off with the apples stuck to their spines, to their burrows, which he thought might be in trees. And then I would read monographs about the real biological reality of these creatures. I would speak to scientists. Again, I'm so lucky to have scientists who are my colleagues and friends. And then I would try to knit them together into something short. The essays would always start off much longer than they are, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 words. And I would try to distill it down and down and down until they were always less than 2.5, so that you could read them in a single sitting. And then hopefully, the idea was you might fall in love. Selecting the creatures was one of the hardest things because I have a huge list of half-written animals that didn't make this cut but that I have kept for some possible other future maybe date. For instance, I wanted to write about camels because we used to try to use them in military campaigns and discovered that one of the reasons that didn't work is that camels just really don't want to participate in war. And then the other reason would be trying to select a mix of things that are never going to be something that we will lay eyes on, where it is safer for them that we don't. And that would be things like the Greenland shark, like the narwhal. I will never see a narwhal, and I think it is better that way. But then also things that I love and with which we are intimately familiar, like the hedgehog, like the crow, like the idea that you can train a crow to use vending machines. So really, the process of selection was trying to be as ruthless with myself as possible, otherwise the book would be infinitely long. The pangolin is, I think, my favourite. It has, at the face of an unusually polite and cautious academic. It is scaled, but it looks like an anteater, hence the reason, scaly anteater. And when they're threatened, they curl up into a ball, which renders them protected from every predator except us. But for us, they have just rendered themselves portable. They are the most trafficked animal in the world, and their numbers are plummeting. And if we don't reverse the trajectory upon which we are currently engaged, there won't be any in 100 years. I think the most surprising thing that I came across was the idea of the Greenland shark, which we believe can live up to 500 years, perhaps even more, which means that there is a Greenland shark alive today who was also alive when Shakespeare was writing Macbeth. That has never ceased to astonish me. One of the most remarkable things that I encountered was the idea of the amazing vindictiveness of crows. They are incredibly intelligent, and they have absolutely no patience with us, which is as it should be. A study was done in an American university about 10 years ago that discovered if you put on a sort of monster mask and you harass crows by taking them out of their nest, potentially damaging their nest, putting them back unharmed, nonetheless alarmed and affronted, those crows will, when they see people with those masks, scold them, attack them, dive bomb them. But they'll do that even when the crows who were originally harmed are dead. They pass along the vendetta onwards and onwards through time. And I find that incredibly impressive and frankly admirable. I think the saddest thing that I came across was a fact that saddens me about us, humanity, which is that we engage in a practice that we call extinction hoarding, which is when conglomerates or individuals stockpile the bodies of endangered animals, rhino horn, tiger skin, wild bluefin tuna, in the understanding that the moment those go extinct in the wild, the value of those bodies will skyrocket, exponentially greater. There are therefore people who are incentivized to hasten the extinction of those creatures. So there are people who are shooting rhinos, even the ones who do not have horns that can be used, simply to usher along the final death. I think that is a thing that we as a humanity do need to be furiously ashamed of. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, what can be done? And this is a thing that I've spoken to so many of my colleagues in conservation and in science, and they say this: if you are lucky enough to have money, the first thing you need to do is make sure that it is not in any way invested in fossil fuels, in projects which can extend the reach of fossil fuel use, on the grounds that those are both profoundly destructive, broadly in a global warming sense and also an on-the-ground sense. Many of the things that need to change are vast and structural. So I think the thing that we need to do is hold our governments to account, to engage in politics at every level, whether that's a local or a national level, to clamour for change. Not to cease to talk about it, even to the converted, preach to the converted, because it is only by keeping it at the forefront of our own imaginations that action will seem the most urgent thing. And finally, there are the personal changes that one can make. My feeling has always been that the structural is vastly more important than the personal, but the personal is also political. So things that we're very familiar with: fly less, eat less meat. Participate in the imagining of ways of experiencing delight or luxury that don't involve the relentless purchasing of new things. And protest. Never cease to protest, because even where protest does not seem to have an immediate and obvious impact, it is a way of assuring ourselves that we mean what we say. And there is nothing more urgently important in the world now than the question of climate change. It is the astonishingly valuable and beautiful future that is at stake. The illustrations are done by a brilliant woman called Talia Baldwin. When I first saw her work, I fell wildly in love because she is able to couple a sense of precision, of the artistry that you would find in sort of 19th century bestiaries, but she is also able to endow her paintings, her art, with a feeling of life, with a feeling of vividness, with a feeling of character. And I wanted pictures that you would long to cut out the book and paste on your wall, which I think you should absolutely do. My newest book is the second in my Impossible Creatures world, but you don't have to have read the first one to read it. It's called The Poisoned King, and it's about a place called the Glemoria Archipelago, where all the creatures of myth that mankind has ever invented are real. So there are dragons and unicorns, but there are also the ones that we wrote down hundreds of years ago and then perhaps forgot a little, like the Ratatoskas, which are a greenhorn squirrel from Norse mythology, or the two-tailed kanko, which you find in Japan and is a tiny two-tailed fox. And it's the story of a young woman whose grandfather is murdered and whose father is accused of the murder. She's in some ways a stand-in for Prince Hamlet. She's a princess. And her job is to prove that he is not guilty. And along the way, it takes them on the back of the Sphinx and into a dragon's lair, and all the way with a fight, a furious fight for justice. The Golden Mole is available from all good bookstores and your local library. Subscribe to the Queen's Reading Room for more bookish content.